Hey guys, tonight we stroll quietly through sun-drenched sands, stepping softly into the ancient silence of Timbuktu, a name that's become shorthand for the middle of nowhere, and yet once stood at the very crossroads of knowledge, wealth, and wandering minds. You probably picture a few crumbling buildings and a lot of heat, but beneath that dust lies something far richer, a city built not just on trade, but on parchment and poetry, on whispered debates in dimly lit corners, and on manuscripts tucked beneath prayer mats and into walls. You can almost feel the air shift as you cross the last stretch of desert dunes, rolling like warm waves beneath your sand-caked boots. The horizon shimmers, and there, emerging like a mirage that forgot to vanish, is Timbuktu. The edges blur not because of distance, but because of time itself. This city doesn't leap out at you. It settles in modest and sunburned, made of the same silt that birthed the river and hardened into homes. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still with me, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing who else is wandering through sleepy history with me tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive as thousands once did, on foot by camel, or perhaps in imagination alone. No customs booths, no baggage claim, just the wind and the sand and the soft swaying of palm fronds beyond the gates. You trail your fingers along the cracked clay walls, each embedded with the faint memory of fingerprints centuries old. The gate creaks, not because it's being dramatic, but because everything here moves slowly, including the hinges. The ground is packed earth-warm beneath your soles. A donkey somewhere is chewing very loudly, possibly on something it wasn't supposed to eat. Children giggle in the distance. You pass a man pouring water from a goatskin bag into a narrow clay basin, and the splash echoes like a bell. Clean water here is its own kind of treasure. Timbuktu rises around you in quiet, squat elegance. These aren't cities of towers and triumph. These are cities of stillness. Everything's the color of the land, ochre, sienna, sun-baked browns. The buildings are sculpted from mud brick adobe known locally as banco, and they breathe with the weather. When it rains, rare, but it happens, they melt a little only to be smoothed and reshaped by hands that remember their edges from childhood. This is no accident. The architecture here is resilient, passive cooling, and deeply sustainable long before those words became eco-buzz. Roofs slope gently to catch rainwater. Walls are thick to trap cool air inside, and the tallest buildings are the mosques, spiked with wood beams that jut like ribs, not just decorative but functional scaffolding for when the time comes to replaster. And you do replaster every year. The whole city comes together, hands full of mud smoothing walls and memories alike, a community chore that's part art, part maintenance, part reminder. Nothing endures unless we help it. And then there's the quiet. Not silence, never silence, but a hush beneath the sounds. Like the city itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if you'll notice. The rustle of palm leaves, the clink of brass teacups, the slow sweep of someone brushing dust from their doorstep over and over. You move slower here, not because you're tired, though. Let's be honest, you probably are, but because the city asks it of you. There's too much texture to rush. A merchant squats by a woven mat, arranging ware strings of amber, carved wooden combs, spices in paper cones. There's something musky and sweet in the air, maybe sandalwood, maybe something you can't name. And through it all, the sun, high hot, unwavering, you pull your scarf tighter across your face. Not because you're hiding, but because centuries of travelers did the same. The sun here is a presence, not a background. It glows in the dust, it stings in the eyes, it etches shadows sharp as calligraphy. Oh, and speaking of heat, Here's your first cheeky fact check of the night, despite what your elementary school globe may have suggested. Timbuktu is not just a metaphor for nowhere. It's a real place, and once it was somewhere very important. In the 14th to 16th centuries, it thrummed with scholars, traders, poets, and pilgrims. It was so wealthy with knowledge that scrolls were more valuable than gold, really. One manuscript, handwritten, bound in goatskin, and full of philosophical musings on rainfall. Worth more than your weight in salt. And that's saying something, because out here was currency. And if that's not curious enough, consider this: historians still argue whether Timbuktu was truly a utopia of books and peaceful scholarship, or whether that image was romanticized later by European travelers enchanted by the mystery of a black intellectual capital. As usual, the truth is murky and dust-covered and somewhere in between. But one thing's certain: Timbuktu wasn't just a trade hub. It was a mind hub. A haven where you didn't just exchange goods, you exchanged ideas. Sufi saints argued about ethics. Jurists debated Sharia law beside astronomers charting stars. You'd buy a watermelon, overhear a treatise on grammar, then get schooled on lunar eclipses while sipping mint tea. Oh, and speaking of tea, it's both beverage and ritual here. Served scalding hot in tiny glasses, poured high so the sugar dissolves with drama. 3 cups, always bitter, like life, sweet like love, and soft like death. That's not a metaphor, that's just tea. You follow a narrow alley now, flanked by high clay walls. Someone's singing nearby, a lullaby maybe, or a praise poem. It echoes low and steady like a heartbeat from under the earth. You stop at a wooden door, its frame etched with faded symbols. Above it, a niche where a worn manuscript once sat to bless the home. The manuscript is gone now, but the dust remembers. You linger a moment longer before stepping into the quiet, the shadow, the city of stories. You duck beneath the low door frame, brushing past a frayed curtain that hangs in place of a door. The interior breathes a different rhythm, cooler, dimmer, older somehow. Inside there's no electricity, no glass, no hum of machines, just the faint scratch of wood on stone as someone drags a stool across the floor. The light filters in through latticework sunlight, broken into soft slices that paint geometric shapes across the ground. This is one of the family libraries, not a towering institution, not a marble hall, just a room lined with carved niches and wooden trunks. You take it in slowly, scrolls bundled in cloth books, bound in goatskin parchment, curled at the edges like sleeping cats. There's a low table in the center, and on it a single manuscript sits open, its ink still dark. Its letters like tiny dancers caught mid-step. The air smells of old paper and cloves. You breathe in, and it's as if you've swallowed a century. Dust floats lazily in the beams of light. A girl in a saffron tunic kneels nearby, gently oiling the pages of a book with a soft cloth dipped in shea butter. It's not just care, it's reverence. And here's the heart of the city, not its markets or its mosques, but these quiet little rooms where knowledge has lived for generations. Not in vaults, but in homes. You blink and realize this isn't a library you visit. This is a library someone sleeps beside, where dinner simmers nearby, and where your bedtime story might be a theological commentary on wind. Families here, like the celebrated Haidara or Mama families, have safeguarded these manuscripts for centuries. Manuscripts passed down like heirlooms, protected through invasions, desert storms, and digital indifference. Some were buried in sand to hide them. Others were smuggled beneath robes. A few were even hidden behind false walls or stashed in goat pens. Call it espionage, call it devotion. Either way it worked. And they didn't just hoard these texts. They used them, read them, copied them by hand under flickering lamps, debated them late into the night over bowls of millet porridge. These libraries aren't time capsules. They're kitchens of the mind. You run your fingers gently over the edges of a manuscript, one of the older ones. The calligraphy swirls like water, looping an Arabic script that's elegant and strangely familiar. On the margins, notes bloom like tiny flowers, readers, writing back to the author across centuries. Some are corrections, some are jokes. One is just the word beautiful underlined twice, and that's your mainstream history fact of the night. Timbuktu's libraries are home to an estimated 300,000 to 700,000 manuscripts, many of them still uncatalogued. That's not just a footnote. That's one of the largest historical archives in Africa and one of the richest anywhere on Earth. Topics include astronomy, medicine, ethics, law, agriculture, poetry, and my personal favorite, an entire treatise on how to tell if a date, the fruit, not the romantic kind, has been cursed by a jinn. Meanwhile, the fringe fact, oh, this one's delicious. There's a manuscript rumored to contain instructions for constructing a flying machine. No one knows if it's serious or satirical, but it includes diagrams, notes on wing structure, and a stern warning not to try it near goats. They are prone to panic, it adds, as are humans when launched midair from a clay rooftop. Historians still argue whether the flying machine scroll is genuine knowledge or medieval sci-fi. Was it a scholar's joke, a dreamer's doodle, or something more daring? The line between research and reverie blurs easily in places like this. And honestly, who hasn't scribbled a little nonsense into the margins of a work meeting? You settle beside the table cross-legged like you've always belonged here. A boy arrives with a tray, small cups of green tea, impossibly hot steam rising like whispered secrets. He sets it down without a word, but gives a nod so serious it makes you feel like you've been granted honorary scholar status. Across the room, an elderly man is cataloging scrolls with an ink-dipped toothpick. No fancy quills here, just what's available and steady, he mutters occasionally. You don't catch the words, but the cadence is familiar, the low grumble of someone negotiating with the past, as if the scrolls are stubborn and refuse to be sorted alphabetically, which, to be fair, they might be. It's strange these manuscripts don't feel old. They feel alive. They whisper when the wind shifts. They stretch when you open them. You're not observing history. You're coexisting with it, sharing space, sharing air. There's no was here, only still. And here's a wild little side note. Many of these texts have never been digitized. Not out of neglect, but out of caution. The people who guard them know what they have. They're not rushing. Some scholars are even trained in traditional breathing techniques to turn pages, no joke. The manuscripts are fragile, and so is the trust of those who protect them. You sip your tea, bitter, slightly sweet, maybe even a little salty. Or maybe that's just your sweaty upper lip. Someone outside plays a balafon, a kind of xylophone made of wood and gourds. The sound drifts in like smoke, gentle and plinking, a lullaby for letters. In this room, time folds in on itself. You could be in 1492, or 1792, or 2 minutes ago. You picture a scholar in indigo robes kneeling at the same spot you now sit, chewing thoughtfully on a date and pondering whether to catalog a poem on camels or a fatwa about taxation. You bet he picked the poem. And that's the thing, history isn't just battles and borders. Sometimes it's a grandmother tucking a poem into her shawl, a boy whispering verses to himself before bed, a scrap of parchment with a grocery list that includes goat butter, lentils, prayer beads, no more mangoes. It's all here, waiting. You just have to slow down enough to notice. Outside the clay walls of the library, the sun hangs heavy, low, amber and stubborn, casting long, liquid shadows over the city's ochre rooftops. You step carefully along a narrow alleyway. Its walls close and warm like the sides of an oven. A faint breeze swirls powdered sand around your ankles. Somewhere, a goat bleats in protest, probably over something deeply personal, like a disagreement about the communal water trough. You round a corner and suddenly the alley opens into a small square. And there it is, a modest adobe structure with a pointed arched doorway and a wooden plaque above the lintel hand-carved with a few Arabic characters. This is not some gleaming ivory tower. This is a madrasa, a centuries-old Islamic school, where the manuscripts you've just glimpsed were studied, debated, even memorized line by line. You slip inside, ducking your head out of respect or reflex, maybe both. The cool air kisses your skin. Light filters in through narrow slits high on the wall. The room smells of chalk sand, old wood, and the ever-present undertone of roasted grain. Somewhere someone is always making flatbread. A circle of students barefoot and draped in indigo and russet robes sit cross-legged around a man with a soft, tired voice and fierce, spark-bright eyes. He's reading from a manuscript, his voice rising and falling like waves, and the students echo his words in unison, chanting, memorizing, tasting each syllable like it might be their last. This is tilawa, oral recitation, a method of learning where rhythm and memory become the ink of the mind. You watch as a young boy, maybe 12, maybe older, closes his eyes and begins reciting an astronomy treatise. Not religious scripture this time, but a detailed account of planetary alignments. He's just finished explaining the phases of the moon when his voice falters. The teacher gently taps a stick against the page. The correction is silent but firm. The boy nods, tries again. Nailed it. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the moment. By the 14th century, Timbuktu was a world-renowned intellectual hub, boasting institutions like the Sankore University, where thousands of scholars from across West Africa and even beyond converged to study subjects ranging from theology and mathematics to botany, law, and medicine. Think of it as a kind of Oxford in the sand, with fewer robes and more turbans. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some ancient exam records from the city show that students were docked points not just for incorrect answers, but for poor penmanship, bad manners, or even arriving with a scruffy beard. Yes, grooming standards in academia. You might flunk algebra, but heaven forbid you show up with bedhead and no oil in your beard. In fact, there's an entire side text that outlines beard oil recipes most pleasing to discerning instructors. Historians still argue whether the curriculum at Timbuktu's universities leaned more theological or scientific. Some suggest the balance tipped toward law and religion, while others insist that secular sciences held equal sway. Either way, you wouldn't just be cramming for an exam here, you might be arguing metaphysics over lentils at lunch. Back in the present, a girl, yes, girls studied too, raises her hand. She's got that expression, the kind of burning, polite rebellion that only academic questions can produce. She asks about an inconsistency in the manuscript's logic. A debate sparks. The teacher smiles, amused, challenged, and maybe a little tired. Two other students join in. You can't keep up. It's part astronomy, part theology, part your mom jokes, but it's glorious. You settle into the dusty wall, warmed by it, as if the city itself were leaning back against you. Someone hands you a scribbled scrap of paper. It's the girl's notes. Neat handwriting, tiny diagrams, even a little doodle of a camel looking unimpressed. You smile. Learning apparently has always included a bit of sarcasm, and now, because no medieval day of school would be complete without it, the teacher closes the manuscript and claps his hands once. Break time. The kids scatter like seeds in the wind. Some head to the rooftop to eat roasted peanuts. Others drift toward the river to skip stones and talk about, well, probably the same things kids always talk about: snacks, siblings, and who's the fastest at something arbitrary. One boy stays behind, flipping through a worn treatise on herbal remedies. You lean over his shoulder. It's in Arabic, yes, but the illustrations are clear. Roots for indigestion, leaves for fever. One sketch appears to show a man being treated for excess laughter. The remedy: boiled tamarind and silence. You'll pass. You leave the madrasa reluctantly. Your body steps out, but your mind stays seated in that circle, chanting the names of stars. Outside, the skies turned molten orange. The soundscape has shifted, no longer soft recitations, but the rhythms of city life returning to full-volume merchants haggling, mothers calling children donkeys, protesting something probably legitimate. The sun leans against the horizon like it's tired, too ready to nap behind the dunes. You follow a group of students as they walk home. Their robes catch the wind like flags. One's humming a tune, an old griot melody maybe, or just something improvised for the road. They pass around a shared pouch of roasted dates, the kind with just enough chew to make conversation impossible and nodding inevitable. You walk with them until the houses thin out and the horizon yawns wide. A single minaret rises in the distance, flanked by the slow-moving silhouettes of birds. A whisper of wind lifts a bit of sand into the air. Someone sneezes. Another laughs. Knowledge, you realize, isn't just stored in books or classrooms. It lives in walking feet, shared snacks, whispered verses, and the long meandering debates that no one ever really wins. You tuck that thought away like a pressed flower in a book as the stars begin to bloom above Timbuktu. You wake the next morning to the soft complaint of wooden shutters being unlatched. Sunlight pools through the narrow window in your guest room. Like honey, slow and warm, the scent of millet porridge drifts in comforting, nutty, slightly burnt. Someone stirring the pot with more enthusiasm than precision. Today's plan: a quiet stroll deeper into the neighborhood, tracing the hidden arteries of Timbuktu's manuscript culture, not in towering libraries this time, but in homes, hidden trunks, and family memory. Because here's the truth, many of the city's manuscripts weren't housed in public buildings at all. They were kept in private family collections, passed down through generations like heirlooms. You step outside into a soft, gold morning. The city feels half awake. Chickens patrol the alleyways like underqualified security guards. The air carries a tang of iron-rich dust and the faintest hint of incense from a nearby courtyard. You follow the sound of low conversation and the rhythmic brushing of a courtyard broom, swish, swish, swish. You arrive at a low square building painted with faded blue symbols and script decorative blessings. Inside, an elderly man greets you with a nod. His robe is sun-bleached saffron and his beard is the color of snow in shade. His name is Ahmed, and he's a guardian not of a museum, but of his family's private collection, over 300 manuscripts tucked into carved wooden boxes and bundled in goatskin pouches. The living room is dim and cool, its thick walls muting the outside heat. Shelves sag under the weight of books that look like they might crumble if you breathe too hard. Ahmed gestures to one. You reach, carefully, fingertips brushing the worn leather spine. The manuscript smells like time, a mix of dust, old ink, and a hint of camphor. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During Timbuktu's golden age from the 13th to the 17th century, it was common for families to compile, copy, and preserve their own manuscript collections. These weren't just religious texts either. You'd find legal contracts, medical treatises, trade agreements, poetry, and even early forms of insurance documents, all penned in ink recipes that sometimes included crushed acacia bark or oxidized metals. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some families used elaborate hiding techniques to protect their manuscripts during periods of unrest. One popular method, burying manuscripts inside clay jars under the floorboards, or sewing them into the linings of ceremonial robes. One bundle was even discovered stuffed inside a broken drum. Imagine finding Aristotle's Meteorologica rolled up inside a tambourine. Historians still argue whether the number of surviving Timbuktu manuscripts reflects the majority of what once existed, or just a fraction. Some estimate hundreds of thousands may still lie undiscovered in the surrounding desert or in attics too dusty to open. Others say what we have now may represent only the most durable works, those copied on higher-grade parchment or stored in cooler rooms. Ahmed opens a box and lifts out a palm-sized volume wrapped in faded indigo cloth. This, he says softly, was my grandfather's. He unties the cloth with reverence. The cover is cracked but whole, and the first page holds a hand-drawn chart, constellations and annotations in the margins, some scholarly, others less so. A tiny sketch of a horse mid-gallop, a note in Arabic that roughly translates to, "Remember not to leave water barrels uncovered. Snakes dislike being surprised." You sit with Ahmed page after page. The script is sharp and slightly slanted, inked with care. He tells you stories of ancestors who crossed the Sahara with caravans trading salt for gold and books for knowledge. Of women who transcribed poetry by candlelight, of children who hid sacred texts under their tunics when war loomed near. The manuscripts aren't museum perfect. Some pages are water-stained. A few corners have been chewed by insects. One volume has an entire passage replaced by a note that reads, "Pages missing, possibly eaten by goat 1721. You both laugh. It feels right. History, after all, has never been clean or tidy. It's lived in. You ask if Ahmed minds if you sketch one of the diagrams. He waves you on, pleased. You take out your notebook and draw a spidery version of a lunar calendar while he sips tea from a tiny copper cup. Outside, the sun climbs higher. Children's voices drift in sing-song and shrill. Someone's hawking roasted peanuts in a voice that could pierce armor. The moment is timeless, a modern city with ancient bones, quietly holding its breath around you. Eventually, Ahmed rewraps the manuscript. He doesn't lock it away, just tucks it gently beneath a cushion. "Safer there," he murmurs. You nod. Somehow you don't question it. As you stand to leave, he hands you a small card. On it is a phrase written in flowing script, "Al-ilm nur," knowledge is light. You tuck it into your pocket right next to your phone. One is printed plastic. The other is 700 years old and still breathing. You step back into the street, and the city greets you like an old friend, dusty sunlit, humming with unseen stories. You pass a woman selling spiced dates under a woven awning. She offers you one for free. It's sticky and warm, tasting like cinnamon cloves and quiet afternoons. You keep walking. Ahead, there's a narrow passageway painted with stars. A shortcut, maybe, or a detour. Either way, it's the kind of place where manuscripts might still sleep in the walls. And you're just the sort of person to go looking. You duck into the alley with that date still lingering on your tongue, sweet and grainy, with a hint of the spice markets you've yet to wander through. This passageway is cooler than the open street, the walls high and close. Shadows fall in soft ribbons patterned by slats of wood, laid across the rooftops like patchwork eaves. You could be in another century. Because in Timbuktu, space has memory, and these quiet in-betweens, they're full of echoes. Your next stop is a building without a sign, just a green door with a brass knocker shaped like a lion's paw. You rap gently. Footsteps approach slow and deliberate. When the door creaks open, you're met by a woman in a deep teal robe, her head wrapped in an indigo scarf that glimmers slightly in the low light. Her name is Layla, and she's a manuscript restorer, one of only a handful left in the city. The air inside her studio is dense with the scent of beeswax, old paper, and something sharper, maybe the vinegar solution used to treat mold. Light filters in through narrow windows covered in parchment thin cloth, casting a golden hue over everything. You step inside. It's a marvel of quiet industry, wooden tools, magnifying lenses, pots of handmade glue, bundles of parchment rolled tight with twine. Some are centuries old, others newly copied and dyed to match originals lost or too fragile to handle. Layla doesn't work fast, she works right. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Restoring manuscripts in Timbuktu isn't just about preservation, it's a form of scholarship. Restorers must understand Arabic calligraphy, West African ink recipes, regional dialects, and even the migration patterns of insects that feed on paper. Some insects prefer the margin flourishes, she explains with a wry smile. They like the fancy bits. Now for your quirky tidbit, some original manuscript pages have turned up in unlikely places. In the 1990s, a crate of manuscripts was found buried beneath a chicken coop stained with feathers and soil, yet still legible. One even had a rooster's footprint in the corner, accidental authenticity as Layla calls it. Historians still argue whether restoration techniques should include modern materials like acid-free plastic sleeves or imported glue, or if such additions compromise the manuscript's integrity. Traditionalists say only local materials, tools, and processes should be used even if they take longer or don't last as long. Others argue the manuscript's survival matters more than purity. Lila doesn't seem terribly bothered. She moves with patience, wiping a fragment of a 14th century poem with a brush made from donkey hair. She lets you watch. The brush dances lightly over the vellum, lifting centuries of dust, but leaving the ink sepia and still clear, untouched. She explains how some manuscripts were written on camel skin parchment, while others used imported paper from Italy or Egypt. Trade routes, she says, left more than silk and gold behind. They brought words and ways of keeping them. You lean closer. This particular manuscript contains a treatise on astronomy complete with delicate diagrams of the stars, planets, and a very judgmental-looking moon. The author wrote in marginal notes berating himself for a miscalculation. A man should not do arithmetic on an empty stomach, he scrawled. You can't help but smile. Layla tells you the ink was made from gallnuts and iron sulfate, sometimes mixed with pomegranate rinds for texture. The recipe was passed down like a family secret because in many ways it was. You ask how she became a restorer. She shrugs. Her grandfather taught her. His tools are still here, tucked into a soft leather roll. She unwraps it for you, tiny chisels, bone folders, and a curved blade for trimming parchment. Some are rusted, others gleam like they've just been made. You wonder aloud if anyone's ever accidentally ruined a page. Layla pauses, then nods. Once, she says, I spilled tea on a contract from 1421. I cried for 3 days. She pauses. Then I copied it all again from memory. The moment sits between you like another manuscript, quiet, valuable, and a little frayed around the edges. She shows you a work in progress. It's a Sufi prayer book, its cover warped by heat. She's rebinding it with goat sinew and silk thread dyed in turmeric. You run your finger gently along the new stitching. It feels soft and alive. The room smells of history and healing. Before you leave, she offers you a look at her smallest manuscript, a palm-sized volume of medical advice for travelers. Tiny, neat script, little sketches of herbs and instructions on treating snakebite with lemon and camel milk. It's pocket-sized, she says, for crossing the desert. You thank her, and she presses a folded scrap of parchment into your palm. Write something down, she says. It lasts longer than saying it. So you do. A quick note, the past is a patient thing. Outside, the light is fading to amber. Shadows lengthen on the sand. A call to prayer drifts through the air, low and melodic, carried on the evening wind. Children chase a tire down the alley laughing. A cat watches you from a rooftop unmoved. You head back toward your room, but your pockets feel heavier, weighted with knowledge and maybe a little beeswax. You've seen how books are made to endure, not just by ink and parchment, but by hands like Layla's, who stitch memory back together with thread and quiet devotion. And as you walk the street, names blur into something softer. You're not just visiting Timbuktu anymore. You're becoming part of the story. It's still writing. The sun has dipped lower now, casting the city in a soft copper haze. Evening in Timbuktu brings a certain hush, like the whole place is holding its breath before nightfall. You follow the curving road past a courtyard where a donkey is dozing under a fig tree. The call to prayer has ended, and the scent of cardamom and lentils drifts from a nearby kitchen window. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for attention, it just is. You're making your way to one of Timbuktu's oldest surviving libraries, the Ahmed Baba Institute. You might be expecting grand pillars or marble halls, but instead you find a simple mud brick structure with deep-set windows and a doorway shaded by a reed mat. Modest, dusty, and utterly full of treasure. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Ahmed Baba Institute was named after one of Timbuktu's most famous scholars, Ahmed Baba al-Timbuktu, who lived in the 16th century. He wrote over 40 books, mostly about law and theology, and was once arrested by Moroccan invaders for refusing to stop teaching. His refusal was so firm it made him a sort of intellectual martyr. Talk about a bad case of tenure denial. A young archivist named Ismail greets you inside. He wears a saffron tunic and wide-brimmed sandals. His hands are stained slightly blue at the fingertips from the indigo dye used in manuscript covers. He leads you through narrow aisles lined with shelves that bend ever so slightly under the weight of centuries. No digital catalog here, just hand-labeled boxes, leather bindings, and the occasional curious spider. Ismail doesn't speak much. He lets the manuscripts do the talking. He opens a drawer and lifts out a folio wrapped in faded cloth. You lean in. The cover is brittle with age, but when he peels it back, the script inside is clean and confident rows of Arabic script, inked in red and black margins, filled with careful annotations. This is a legal commentary from the 1500s. It debates inheritance laws for merchants traveling across the Sahara. Imagine needing legal advice before taking a camel ride. He tells you the library holds over 30,000 manuscripts, most rescued from private collections, family homes, and even underground caches. During the 2012 crisis, when militants threatened Timbuktu's cultural heritage, librarians and locals smuggled thousands of manuscripts to safety. Some were hidden in flour sacks. Others were packed into metal trunks and carried by boat or donkey under cover of night. Which brings us to your quirky tidbit. One family reportedly hid a manuscript inside a broken refrigerator buried beneath a chicken shed. The fridge was unplugged, of course. Even in Timbuktu, nobody's that desperate for cold leftovers. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's libraries should digitize everything or keep the manuscripts in their original form. Proponents of digitization cite preservation and accessibility. Others fear that removing the physical texture, smell, and even the handwriting distances us from the manuscript's full story. After all, a book isn't just its words, it's how it feels to hold them. Ismail hands you a pair of cotton gloves and invites you to gently turn the pages of a 14th century text on astronomy. You oblige, flipping slowly through diagrams of constellations, phases of the moon, and even eclipses described in poetic verse. One diagram maps the movements of Venus with a note in the margin. This star is most dangerous in the morning. Same, you think. Same. In another corner, a stack of manuscripts sits under a mosquito net, an old preservation trick. The net isn't for the bugs you see. It's for the ones you don't. Silverfish in particular are known to eat through the bindings. There's something both hilarious and heartbreaking about ancient knowledge being devoured by a creature the size of your pinky nail. You sit for a while on a carved bench watching as Ismail sorts a pile of folios by hand. He hums quietly a tune that might be centuries old or just something he heard on the radio this morning. In Timbuktu, the line between ancient and modern is deliciously blurry. At one point, he pauses and shows you a page filled with marginalia, little notes, jokes, and prayers scribbled between the lines by scribes or later readers. One says, "Forgive me, this page was copied during a sandstorm." Another reads, "My cat walked across this sheet, ignore the smudge." History, it turns out, is full of cat people. You ask Ismail what his favorite manuscript is. He grins and pulls out a slim volume bound in red goatskin. It's a book of poetry, anonymous, written in a mix of Arabic and Songhai. The final stanza reads, "May your words outlive the fire, the flood, the forgetting." He says it like a blessing, which in a way it is. When you step outside again, the sun has slipped below the horizon. The sky turns the color of pomegranate peel, and the first stars begin to bloom. A child runs past chasing a chicken barefoot and laughing. You hear drums in the distance, faint rhythmic like a heart still beating through the dust. And as you walk away from the library, you don't feel like you've read history. You feel like you've touched it. The stars are out now, sharp pinpricks of silver scattered across a velvet sky. You wander through the outer quarters of Timbuktu, where the desert presses close and the homes cluster, like ships in a harbor of sand. Lamps flicker behind reed windows, casting warm golden glows that spill onto packed earth streets. It's bedtime for most of the city, but your feet still follow curiosity, and curiosity leads you to the scholars' district. This neighborhood has no grand signposts, no polished plaques, but what it does have, what it's always had, is knowledge. Some of the most influential minds in West African history once lived on these very streets. Their houses might look unassuming now, worn with time and weather, but step through their gates, and you'd be stepping into the minds of giants. Your mainstream historical fact. During the 14th to 16th centuries, Timbuktu was home to one of the densest concentrations of scholars anywhere in the Islamic world. Families of jurists, theologians, philosophers, and poets lived side by side here. They didn't just write for local audiences, they corresponded with Cairo, Fez, even Mecca. It was like the Harvard dorms if Harvard had better tea and more sand. You pause at a small house with high walls and a wooden door reinforced by hammered iron studs. The plaque beside it reads in faded Arabic script, Abd al-Rahman's House of Law. It's locked now, long since converted to a historical site. But you press your ear to the door and imagine the rustle of parchment, the murmur of disputing students, the sudden snap of a scholar's fingers when a brilliant point strikes home. You picture long arguments about whether trade with infidels was permitted or how lunar eclipses affected inheritance rulings. Just your typical Friday night fun. And here comes your quirky tidbit. One scholar in Timbuktu was famous for refusing to wear shoes, claiming that direct contact with the earth increased divine understanding. Locals still tell stories of him walking through the market barefoot, debating theology while sidestepping camel dung with divine grace. As you keep walking, you notice something peculiar: carved wooden shelves built directly into the outer walls of some houses. These were once manuscript nooks. Families used to store or display scrolls and bound texts, here both for protection and to share knowledge with passing neighbors. It's like a medieval little free library, except instead of children's books, it held treatises on astronomy and advice on camel hygiene. You duck into a small house on the edge of the quarter. It's nearly empty now, just a few old men sipping strong green tea with enough sugar to shock a dentist. The air is thick with steam and mint. You order a cup and sit near the window watching as shadows stretch long across the sand. One of the men eyes you curiously and in a voice like crumpled parchment asks if you've seen the moon's reflection in the mosque's fountain. You haven't, but it sounds exactly like the kind of thing you should do next. Historians still argue whether the neighborhood-based scholarship model in Timbuktu fostered deeper intellectual independence or limited innovation due to its isolation. On one hand, scholars were insulated from political interference, which helped preserve their teachings across generations. On the other hand, some argue it created echo chambers where debates sometimes revolved around splitting increasingly narrow hairs, like how many angels could dance on a camel's hump. Spoiler, probably fewer than you think. Your tea arrives in a small silver pot with a tiny porcelain cup. You pour it from high above, watching the stream arc through the air like a tiny waterfall. It's strong, sweet, and a little smoky, like the desert boiled into a beverage. The man beside you hums a tune and begins to tell a story about a scholar who dreamed that his manuscripts turned into birds and flew across the Sahara. He takes a sip, then adds, "They never came back, but their words did." You sit with that for a moment. Then you step back into the night and follow the narrow path past sleeping goats and shuttered stalls. A breeze picks up soft and dry brushing grains of sand, and along the path in whispering trails, it carries the scent of distant fires, someone baking bread, someone else burning incense to keep away mosquitoes and wandering spirits. You smile. Some things never change. At the far edge of the quarter, you spot a faint glow. You round a corner and find a boy sitting cross-legged by a lantern, writing in a small notebook. His pen scratches steadily. You ask what he's doing, and he replies shyly, "Copying the verses my grandfather remembered from an old manuscript." You ask if he can read them aloud. He does. His voice is soft, uncertain, but the words ring clear. The ink may fade, but truth remains, a whisper born through wind and grains. You thank him, and he grins, embarrassed but proud. He folds the notebook carefully, tucks it into his satchel, and disappears into the dark. You stand there a moment longer, alone with the stars and the lingering echo of words that were almost forgotten now, newly remembered. And somehow everything feels just a little more connected. The hour grows later and the air turns cooler, though in Timbuktu, cool still means you can walk 5 minutes without melting into a sandal-shaped puddle. You veer east now into one of the older districts, where shadows stretch like inky fingers over the sand-colored alleys. This is where some of the oldest manuscript libraries once stood, hidden within family homes, tucked behind clay walls stored under beds, and sometimes buried in clay pots beneath the floorboards. Not out of neglect, mind you, but out of reverence. Here books were more than books. They were living things, sacred, worth more than gold, sometimes more than life, especially when the world around them grew turbulent. Your mainstream historical fact. During the Moroccan invasion of 1591, and in later periods of conflict, families in Timbuktu risked their lives to protect their manuscripts. They smuggled them out to the countryside, hid them in desert caves, and passed them down like holy relics. Even today, descendants of those families continue to safeguard their inherited texts, many of which remain unpublished and unread by outsiders. You duck into a mud-brick courtyard, moonlight slanting across its floor. A well stands at the center, and beyond it, an arched wooden doorway hangs open. Inside one of Timbuktu's family libraries, not a public museum, not an academic archive, a home where history sleeps in silence, surrounded by generations of whispered stories and burnt lamp shadows. Inside the cool room, the scent hits you first, aged leather, dry parchment, and that slightly peppery old ink smell that clings to libraries like loyal perfume. Manuscripts lie stacked in bundles tied with braided cord, each one wrapped in dyed cloth, indigo, ochre, dusty saffron. A boy about 10 years old peeks up at you from behind a low table where he's dusting a thick stack of texts with a feather. You nod, he nods back, then returns to his work. You sit on a cushion. A soft breeze slips through a window slit. Someone places a manuscript in your lap. It's lighter than you expect. The cover is thin leather, hand-tooled, faded. You open it. Inside, flowing Arabic script in dark brown ink, flecked with minute illuminations, tiny golden stars, indigo vines creeping along the margins. You trace the script with your finger, even though you can't read it. You don't need to. The weight of the words of someone's thoughts from 600 years ago presses into your fingertips. It's humbling. Like finding someone's breath caught in amber. Your quirky tidbit for tonight. Some Timbuktu manuscripts were bound not with thread, but with camel hair. Apparently, camel hair was durable, flexible, and plentiful, especially if your camel was shedding anyway. It also added a rather unique scent to the finished product, the medieval equivalent of new book smell, but with a side of barnyard. Historians still argue whether the majority of manuscripts were written by local authors or copied from traveling Islamic texts brought in via trade routes. Some scholars believe the libraries mostly held West African interpretations of classical works, while others argue they reflect more original contributions than previously assumed. Either way, the idea that thousands of intellectual texts were being written, debated, and preserved in the middle of the Sahara blows a rather large hole in the myth of Africa as a dark continent. And you flip another page. This one is a medical text. You recognize a drawing of a human figure with notes scrawled at each joint, perhaps early guidance for treating fevers or joint pain. You glance to the next page and raise an eyebrow. Is that a diagram of a liver shaped like a pomegranate? It's charmingly inaccurate, but strangely beautiful. Not every page is a masterpiece, but every page meant something. A soft voice startles you. The boy is speaking now, pointing at another book. "That one's about the stars," he says. "My grandfather says it teaches you how to know when to plant millet." You ask if he's read it. He nods. "I like the part about the comet. It says it was a sign of rain." You both look up at the ceiling, smooth and low beams crisscrossing like a ship's hull. The stars outside, ancient and indifferent, twinkle behind slatted windows. You wonder what it must be like to grow up surrounded by this quiet gravity, by the knowledge that your bedtime stories are stitched into the very fabric of history. A woman enters, maybe the boy's aunt, maybe a caretaker. She smiles, offers you a cup of spiced milk. You accept. It's warm, creamy, with a hint of cardamom, perfectly suited to a room where people read by firelight and stories never truly end. You sip, watching the boy roll another manuscript into a cloth and tie it with calm reverence. It's as if he's tucking an ancestor in for the night. Eventually, the woman motions gently toward the door. Not a dismissal, more a nudge. You've seen enough, her eyes seem to say. Let the rest sleep now. You rise, bow slightly, whisper a thank you. Out in the alley again, the moon hangs low over the rooftops like a pale ceramic bowl, and you walk slowly barefoot on warm sand. The homes around you are silent, and behind every shutter it's easy to imagine shelves groaning under the weight of history. Each family a fortress of forgotten wisdom, each child a possible future scholar. You pass a low stone wall where someone has etched a proverb in Tifinagh script. You can't read it, but in your mind you translate it anyway. Guard your words, like water in the desert, too much spilled, and none remains to drink. And with that, you keep walking. The night is deep, but the past is deeper. You leave the alleys behind and wander into the edge of the dunes again, where the lights of the city begin to flicker out one by one like dying embers. Here, beyond the bustle of mud brick lanes and rooftop whispers, the Sahara stretches out in soft, quiet humps of sand. But you're not alone out here. A faint glow ahead signals another kind of gathering, not of scholars, but of traders. You've found a caravanserai, or what's left of one. Stone foundations, half-crumbled walls, an old water trough dry as bone. Still, the spirit of the place clings like a scent in the air, sweat, leather, mint tea, and camel dung, history's favorite cologne. This was once a place of rest and commerce for merchants hauling salt, gold, spices, and yes, manuscripts. You step closer to the outline of a former courtyard and picture it alive, camels, groaning men bargaining in half a dozen languages, children darting through baskets of dates, someone strumming a lute while smoke curls from a cooking fire. You can practically hear the flap of fabric tents and the hiss of sand caught in wind. Mainstream historical fact, incoming Timbuktu was a linchpin of the trans-Saharan trade routes, especially from the 12th to 16th centuries. Salt from the north came in heavy slabs, sometimes worth its weight in gold. Gold came from the south, often panned from the rivers of Mali. And books, those featherweight treasures, flowed both ways, copied and carried across blistering like letters to the future. And you're here now, standing where the camels once knelt and the cooks once stirred millet porridge in iron pots. It's strange, isn't it, how a place can be both ruined and alive? The wind doesn't care if the walls still stand, it remembers the voices. You sit on a fallen block of sandstone. The stars blink above you like ancient punctuation marks. Out here, without lamplight, you can see how truly vast the sky is. A black velvet dome pricked with silver. Quirky tidbit time. Among the goods traded in Timbuktu were live ostriches. Yep, full-sized, opinionated, neck-whipping ostriches. They were sometimes brought as exotic gifts for rulers or sold for their feathers, which were used to fan royalty or decorate elite turbans. Try stuffing that in a saddlebag. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's manuscript trade was mainly about religious and legal texts, or if it included a wider spread like astronomy, poetry, or even romance. Some surviving documents suggest love poems were shared alongside legal contracts and scholarly disputes. Others argue those poetic fragments were marginalia notes added by bored scribes during long copying sessions. You lie back on the warm stone, imagining one of those scribes halfway through a dusty religious treatise scrawling a wistful couplet in the margins. Her gaze bends the stars. My ink dries in longing. Then right back to work on tax law. The past was never all sermons and sand. It was full of sighs and sarcasm, just like now. A soft shuffle behind you. You glance back. A cluster of young men has gathered, local guides maybe, or descendants of traders. One of them in a faded green tunic is holding a tea kettle over a portable brazier. He sees you, smiles, nods. You nod back. Soon you're seated among them, sipping tiny cups of mint tea so strong it could resurrect a weary goat. The kettle whistles. Someone jokes about the stars being late for their own watch. You don't need to know the language to catch the humor. Laughter, after all, has its own grammar. The man with the kettle begins to tell a story. You catch the word jinn more than once. His hands weave through the air like dancing flames. He speaks of desert spirits, lost caravans, a book that can summon sandstorms. It's half history, half spell. You lean in, not because you believe it okay, maybe 5%, but because it feels like something you should carry home. Not a trinket, a tale. When the story ends, the group falls silent for a moment. Then another man, older, begins reciting a poem, slow, rhythmic, heavy with breath. Even without translation, it feels like the desert singing back. You thank them with a bow. Stand. Dust off your clothes. One of the younger men gives you a slice of preserved fig wrapped in cloth. You tuck it away. The caravanserai behind you glows faintly in the moonlight. Its edges blur with the sand, as if it's fading back into the dunes from which it rose. You walk on, through the sand, through memory, through the stories buried in the bones of this place. Because Timbuktu, for all its crumbling stones and quiet manuscripts, is still writing itself, and tonight you're just one more footnote in its margins. You wake, or rather realize, you never quite slept beneath a tangle of stars and stories, both of which seem to hum just beneath your skin. The tea lingers on your tongue, bitter and sweet, and the night folds around you like a cotton shawl. But dawn is stirring. You feel it before you see it. The sky turning from velvet to ash, the wind softening the hush before the world remembers it's supposed to be noisy. You head back toward the city proper. The way is slow, not because you're tired, though you are, but because you don't want to miss anything. Sand crunches underfoot. Somewhere a rooster lets out a confused half-crow like it's testing the morning. You pass a donkey cart creaking in the other direction, led by a boy humming to himself, half asleep on his feet. This time you're not going to a library. Not quite. You're going underground. You duck through a small, narrow door in the wall of a private compound, a place that from the outside looks like a plain family home. Inside, you're greeted by a man in a worn indigo robe. He nods once, then lifts a corner of a woolen rug, revealing a trap door. It opens with a breath of cool, dry air. Below, there is no grandeur, no ornate archways or gold-leafed calligraphy, just darkness and the soft rasp of stone stairs underfoot. You descend carefully, lantern in hand, your fingers grazing the clay walls. And then at the bottom, shelves. So many shelves. They line the narrow room like ribs holding hundreds, maybe thousands of manuscripts. Leather-bound, cloth-wrapped, some stacked in careful piles. You are standing inside one of Timbuktu's hidden libraries, a private archive kept safe beneath the floorboards of everyday life. Mainstream historical fact. When Islamic extremists occupied northern Mali in 2012, Timbuktu's manuscripts were in danger. But locals, historians, and librarians worked together in a kind of cultural rescue mission, smuggling the texts out in secret. Wooden crates were passed hand to hand, sometimes hidden in grain sacks or beneath truck beds. Over 350,000 documents were saved. It wasn't the army, it wasn't foreign aid, it was librarians, smugglers of ink and vellum sneaking wisdom through checkpoints, like contraband hope. Quirky tidbit. Some of the manuscripts were disguised as bundles of fish to avoid detection. Yes, actual fish wrappers. You imagine someone pulling back a flap, expecting tilapia, and finding a 13th century treatise on planetary motion. Surprise! Historians still argue whether this massive archive was always meant to be hidden, or whether it became secret only out of necessity. Were these texts kept underground for centuries, or only tucked away when war came knocking? The truth, like most things in Timbuktu, probably lies somewhere in the dust. You pick your way through the aisle. Every breath feels reverent. The air smells of old paper-dried flowers and earth. The man in indigo watches you gently, then selects a manuscript from a shelf. He opens it with the care you'd reserve for a sleeping child. Inside, the ink dances. Arabic script flows across the page in neat rows, the occasional margin dotted with symbols or notes. Some pages are ringed in gold, others bear fingerprints, real smudged human prints, left by scribes who died centuries ago. Their presence is still here, literal and figurative. The man nods for you to sit, and you do. You don't speak. You just listen as he reads aloud. His voice is low, rhythmic, like a lullaby sung to memory itself. You can't understand the words, but the tone is enough. It's a legal document, you guess maybe a land dispute or a contract, but it's read like poetry. Later you ask about the preservation process. He smiles, opens a wooden cabinet, and reveals rows of tiny tools, brushes, soft cloths, little pouches of desiccant. A cotton glove hangs from a nail like a relic. He tells you through gesture and halting French that each book must be cleaned regularly, that termites are an enemy more feared than fire, that sometimes the best way to preserve knowledge is to keep it quiet. You nod and wonder how many stories the world has lost simply because no one whispered them often enough. You thank him, merci, shukran, nods and hand-to-heart gestures. And then just before you climb the stairs, he gives you something, a single page, not ancient, but copied by hand, a poem, he says, from the 14th century. You trace the careful lines with your eyes. It speaks of silence and sand, and how wisdom is a flame best sheltered from wind. You tuck it into your bag like a talisman. Back in the sunlight, the city feels brighter, not louder, but warmer, as if it knows you've been trusted with something rare. A story not everyone gets to carry. You pass a woman sweeping her doorstep, a child drawing shapes in the dust with a stick, a goat that looks at you like it's been expecting you all morning. Life goes on as it always has, but now you see the threads beneath it, the quiet effort to remember. That hidden library wasn't just a basement, it was an act of rebellion, a vault of hope, a gentle refusal to let the past vanish. You walk on the copied poem still warm in your pocket. Timbuktu may be aging, crumbling at the edges, but its pages are still turning. And now, your fingers have touched one. You're back in the main streets now, if they can be called streets. Really, they're more like suggestion lines etched into the sand, just wide enough for two donkeys to argue about personal space. The sun has risen gently at first, then with the confidence of a king returning from exile. The air smells of warming earth and morning bread, the kind of scent that convinces you maybe the day won't be so bad after all. You're heading toward a house that doesn't appear on any modern maps, not because it's secret, but because modern maps don't always care about stories. And this house, it's made of stories. Mud walls, wooden beams, tiny arched doorways, and inside the legacy of one of Timbuktu's most famous sons. You duck your head beneath a carved lintel and step into the former home of Ahmed Baba, a 16th century scholar, theologian, and proud bibliophile. Imagine if someone crossbred a medieval monk, a Renaissance professor, and a grumpy librarian with strong opinions about footnotes. That's Ahmed Baba. Mainstream historical fact. Ahmed Baba was one of West Africa's most prolific scholars. He wrote over 40 books ranging from law and philosophy to biographies and linguistic studies. His personal library reportedly contained thousands of manuscripts, many of which were lost when he was exiled to Morocco during a Moroccan invasion in 1591. His home, now a modest heritage site, is quiet. You can hear the tap-tap of pigeons on the clay roof, above the creak of wood as it stretches with the heat. Inside the walls display copies of his writings, photographs of the real manuscripts safely archived elsewhere, and translations that try their best to keep up with the complexity of his thought. Quirky tidbit: Ahmed Baba once complained in a letter that during his exile in Morocco, the locals mistook him for being illiterate because he wrote in Arabic rather than Latin. It's the 16th century equivalent of someone assuming you're unintelligent because you don't use emojis. Historians still argue whether Ahmed Baba's exile helped spread Timbuktu's intellectual influence or whether it marked the beginning of the city's scholarly decline. Either way, the man left footprints in both places, inked and otherwise. You pause in the cool shadow of his study. There's no desk, no original furniture, but you can picture him there, surrounded by scrolls, arguing with a student over the finer points of jurisprudence, or maybe just sipping tea and pretending not to eavesdrop on street gossip. The guide, an older man with patient eyes, explains that Ahmed Baba also helped organize manuscript copying projects. He ensured that multiple versions of important texts were created in case one was damaged or lost. A kind of historical cloud storage, only without the terrifying sink. Failed messages. You're shown a facsimile of a particularly beautiful manuscript, a genealogical chart of West African rulers, written in flowing Arabic script and highlighted with delicate red ink. You squint to follow the lines tracing history like a family tree grown in desert soil. Then, just when you think you've seen the highlight of the visit, the guide reaches into a narrow cupboard and pulls out a replica of a manuscript page that Ahmed Baba hand-wrote, one of his many works on Islamic law. The margins are filled with tiny notations. Even his footnotes have footnotes. You imagine him sighing dramatically every time someone misquoted him in a debate. There's a small garden out back, just a patch of sand really, with a few hardy plants, and a bench made from salvaged wood. You sit for a moment, letting the heat settle around you like a loose robe. The birds are louder now, and somewhere a radio buzzes, faintly playing a tune that seems both new and ancient. The guide joins you and shares a final story legend, says that Ahmed Baba's mother was the daughter of a Fulani scholar, and that he learned to write before he could speak fluently. Likely apocryphal, but you kinda hope it's true. It's the kind of detail that makes the past feel weirdly possible. You thank him again, hand over heart. Then you walk back through the narrow door, past the lintel into the light. The house recedes behind you, its mud walls blending into the city like a story settling back into silence. But the man lingers in your thoughts, not just for his intellect, but for his stubbornness, for believing that words mattered enough to protect, to copy, to argue about across centuries. You can almost hear him muttering from beyond time, "If you're going to misquote me, at least cite the page." You smile and keep walking. Timbuktu, for all its dust and time-softened edges, has a pulse, and scholars like Ahmed Baba are part of its rhythm beats between the silences, ink flowing beneath the sand. The day presses on golden and gentle, and you find yourself wandering deeper into the old city. The houses lean toward each other like gossiping neighbors' mud walls etched with the subtle brushstrokes of time, and soon your feet carry you to a quieter part of Timbuktu, not silent, just subdued, where fewer tourists wander, and the dust hangs a little heavier in the air. Here lies the modest sanctuary of one of the city's unsung heroes, not a sultan or a sage, but a craftsman, a bookbinder. And yes, even that title barely scratches the surface. In a place where manuscripts meant everything, binders were like surgeons, precise, patient, and often a little opinionated about glue. You step inside his workshop, or what remains of it. There's no dramatic threshold, no iron gate, just a low archway and the faint smell of animal hide and dried pigment. You half expect the binder himself to poke his head around the corner, asking whether you've brought parchment or just more questions. Mainstream historical fact. Timbuktu's manuscript culture thrived, in part because of skilled artisans who hand-bound the texts. Leather covers were dyed and tooled with geometric patterns, while pages were often stitched together using thread made from natural fibers. No two bindings were ever quite the same. You pause by a long table, rough and bleached by years of work. A few replicas rest there now, a curved all lengths of sinew, a polished bone folder. Small things, humble things, but tools that once carried the burden of centuries. The space feels lived in, as if the air still holds the low hum of a man muttering to himself, threading needles, weighing paper, or tapping gently with a wooden mallet to settle the pages in place. You can almost hear him grumbling about sand in the glue again. Not everything about history is noble. Sometimes it's just gritty. Quirky tidbit. Many Timbuktu manuscripts included small protective charms bound into the covers, tiny slips of verse or invocation meant to guard the knowledge within. Some were stitched so cleverly into the spine that even modern conservationists have missed them at first glance. You imagine fingers working those charms in murmuring prayers or poems with each stitch. A kind of spellcraft meets scholarship. May your margins never mold might have been the ancient version of live, laugh, love. Historians still argue whether these bookbinding styles originated in Timbuktu or were imported from other North African traditions and gradually personalized. It's the historical version of who wore it first, but with leather tooling instead of red carpet gowns. The binder's home attached to the workshop is barely 2 rooms wide. There's a narrow alcove where you imagine he kept ink and scraps, a lofted shelf for supplies, and a tiny courtyard where dye vats once bubbled under the sun. You step into that courtyard now. A gecko darts past your foot. There's a potted aloe under the wall's shade, its green faded like a photograph. And though the vats are gone, you can still see the stains on the stone floor, blotches of rust red and blue-black, a painter's palette left out in the rain of years. You take a seat on a sun-warmed bench once used for sorting bindings by owner or theme. Maybe the craftsman sat here after long days, wiping his hands on a cloth that would never come fully clean. You let your thoughts drift. How many scholars passed through his hands? How many arguments about binding order or margin size? Was he the kind who corrected mistakes with sighs or with fire? The guide, a younger woman this time, scholarly but warm, joins you. She tells you that many manuscripts were repaired over centuries. Binding was never a one-and-done job. Pages tore, threads frayed, covers cracked under desert dryness. So these artisans became restorers, their hands preserving not only words, but the belief that words deserved to survive. She points out a corner of the courtyard where scraps of discarded parchment were found during a recent restoration project. On one of them, a list of customers' prices and a doodle of what appears to be a donkey wearing a scholar's cap. Whether that's satire or advertising is unclear. You both laugh, gently careful not to let the sound bounce too loudly off the walls. As the sun shifts, the shadows grow longer, and the scent of dust sweetens with the first hint of evening. The binder's story is quiet but not small. In a city famed for intellect, someone still had to make sure the thoughts stayed bound, stitched, and whole. Before you leave, the guide offers you a replica bookmark dyed with natural indigo, patterned with a star design often used in Sahelian manuscript margins. A small thing, but heavier in meaning than it looks. You thank her, step outside, and walk back into the warm hush of the city. Your fingers play with the edges of the bookmark. The thought hits you, this wasn't just a craftsman's job. It was devotion made tangible, line by line, thread by thread. You pass other doors, now most closed for the afternoon rest. But you wonder behind how many of them are stories still being stitched, still being held together by hands as careful as they are unseen. Not all legacies wear crowns. Some wear aprons, hold needles, and leave behind bindings strong enough to outlive even memory. The sun has begun its descent behind the low Sahel horizon, washing the mud-brick city of Timbuktu in a bronze, almost holy hue. The heat no longer presses. Instead, it folds itself into the corners of doorways, leaving the air soft and quiet. Your steps lead you now toward a different kind of legacy, not one etched in script, but one hummed, sung, and whispered. You're heading to a place that was never marked on maps. A scholar's home, not quite. A mosque, not this time. Instead, you arrive at an old courtyard tucked behind a cluster of small earthen homes. There, under the shade of a gnarled fig tree, is the gathering place of oral historians, griots the keepers of memory through voice alone. Mainstream historical fact. While Timbuktu was known for its written manuscripts, its oral traditions were equally vital. Griots, or jelly. In the Mande languages preserve genealogies, laws, and legends by heart, serving as living libraries, some with memories stretching back dozens of generations. The space is unassuming. A few woven mats lie on the ground, and an old clay jug sweats slowly on a low stone shelf. You sit cross-legged near the center. Your guide for the evening, an elderly man with a soft, musical cadence, nods to you as he settles in. His fingers absently strum a battered ngoni, a traditional stringed instrument that looks like a cousin of both banjo and harp. He begins to speak. The stories start simple names, places, lineages. Then come the flourishes, the tale of a king whose sword wept. When stolen, a woman who spoke 12 languages and could silence dust storms with her singing, a boy born with the calligraphy of 1,000 proverbs etched on his palms. Quirky tidbit. Some griots trained from childhood using a method called narrative imprinting, where each phrase of a story was matched with a physical movement or rhythm pattern. It was like learning Homer's epics with choreography. You watch as his hands and voice work together. When he speaks of a storm, his fingers drum the ngoni like rain. When he mentions a journey, he leans forward, gaze narrowing as if he's walking with the hero. It's captivating and deeply hypnotic. A small group has gathered now, drawn by the sound. A young girl hums softly under her breath, trying to memorize a line. A boy mimics the elder's rhythm on a nearby calabash, more focused than playful. This isn't performance, it's inheritance. Historians still argue whether griot traditions in Timbuktu blended directly with Islamic teachings or remained parallel and separate. Some scholars point to shared themes, justice, legacy, the divine, while others note clear distinctions in form and function. It's an academic duet that hasn't quite found its harmony. But here in this fading courtyard, it hardly matters. The griot pauses, lifts his gaze to you, and asks if you'd like to hear a tale that has never been written down. Your polite nod is more than enough. He tells you of the lost camel of Taghaza, a salt caravan beast so wise it could quote Quranic verses, but so stubborn it refused to cross a stream. unless it first heard its own name sung in a specific key. The tale spirals into a soft comedy, then lands in a gentle moral about memory and names. You find yourself smiling, not because the story is outlandish, though it is, but because it makes a kind of strange sense. In a world built on shifting dunes and scattered texts, remembering the right name at the right moment could very well unlock the impossible. The griot's voice grows quieter, his cadence slower, signaling the tale's end. But he doesn't stop. He moves into a song, a low lullaby barely above a hum, in a language you don't understand but don't need to. Your body already feels heavier, softer. Something about the rhythm settles in your bones like warm sand. You glance around the courtyard. Someone is lighting a small oil lamp. The shadows stretch and flicker. The ngoni glints faintly in the firelight. This, you realize, is a kind of manuscript too, just one made of sound and breath. The griot stops. There's no applause, just a shared exhale. And then the sounds of the city slowly return, the creak of a gate, a child's laugh, the clink of cookware behind a wall. The world resumes. You stand slowly, thank him in the gentlest voice you can manage. He nods again, then begins quietly tuning his ngoni. For the next story, he may sit here until stars claim the sky. As you leave, you realize there is no written record of what you just heard. No scanned page, no digitized archive. If you forget, it's gone. If you remember, it lives. But in that fleeting space between vanishing and memory, there is something deeply beautiful, something that doesn't need to be held forever, just long enough to feel it, long enough to pass it along. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember the tune the next time you see a camel being particularly difficult. Night deepens in Timbuktu, and the stars above you hang sharp and weightless, as if someone has poked holes in the black silk of the sky. The breeze cools your skin and carries with it the mingled scents of baked earth, old paper and wood smoke. By now, your legs are tired from wandering through centuries, but the city still has one last pocket of wonder tucked in its folds. You're heading now to the outskirts, not far, just beyond the old city wall where fewer lanterns burn. Here sits a building that might not catch your eye at first glance, low-rounded, almost like a sand dune itself. But within its mud-brick walls lies something strange, precious, and a little mysterious, a manuscript restoration workshop. Mainstream historical fact. Timbuktu's manuscript conservation efforts gained global attention in the 21st century, particularly after violent extremists threatened to destroy thousands of ancient texts during the 2012 to 2013 occupation. Locals and scholars risked their lives to smuggle them out for safekeeping, and today, careful hands work daily to preserve what remains. You slip inside and are greeted by a quiet buzz of activity, not noisy, just focused. A single oil lamp flickers in each corner, and several people are seated at low tables, heads bent, fingertips ginger. The room smells of parchment glue and time. Here, manuscripts are nursed back to life. A woman in a saffron-colored wrap delicately applies a glue made from local tree resin to a torn page. Another in indigo robes uses a camel hair brush to remove flecks of dust from a cover too fragile to be opened fully. And here's the quirky tidbit. One of the best cleaning tools, bread. Yes, soft, stale bread rolled into small balls is used to gently lift dirt from parchment without damaging the ink. If that sounds like a bakery mishap, well, history has always been a little bit resourceful. You edge closer to a workstation where two men are puzzling over a damaged binding. They're murmuring about fiber patterns and debating whether the original stitching technique was closer to Moroccan or Andalusian styles. You half expect a magnifying glass to appear, but no, they use their eyes alone, honed by years of practice. A third man unrolls a fragment that had been hidden in a ceiling beam for decades. The ink is faded, the script nearly ghostly. Kufik, someone whispers, naming the angular script. You lean in. The words are beyond you, but the reverence is not. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's preservation efforts are best served by international funding and digitization, or whether the soul of the manuscripts lies in keeping them local, tactile, and lived in. It's a difficult tension between sharing knowledge and safeguarding roots. You're shown a restored volume, nothing ornate, just a small text on lunar calendars. The pages ripple slightly like thin leather, and the margins are peppered with corrections annotations, even a doodle of what looks like a lizard. It's more than information. It's personality. It's someone's study notes from 500 years ago. A restorer smiles and gestures for you to touch it very lightly. You do. It's warm, not in temperature but in presence, the kind of warmth that makes you feel just for a heartbeat, like part of a lineage. Nearby, another table is less solemn. Two teenage apprentices are testing dyes on scraps of cloth and parchment, laughing quietly as they try to replicate the red ochre hue from a 14th century recipe. You overhear one of them joke that if it doesn't work, they'll blame the goat. That moment feels so human, so timeless. The same trial and error spirit that created these books still lingers, and so does the joy. The workshop is winding down now. One by one, tables are cleared, brushes washed, scrolls rewrapped in linen. You help fold a muslin cloth over a bundle of manuscripts, as though tucking in a child for the night. A final lamp is doused. The room exhales. You step outside again. The sky has turned from silk to velvet, and a few faint drum beats pulse in the distance, perhaps a celebration or just someone practicing rhythm into the quiet. As you walk back through narrow alleyways, past silent courtyards and shuttered doorways, the image of that crumbling manuscript stays with you. Not because it's rare or ancient, though it is, but because someone chose to save it, to dust it off, mend it, read it, to care. And suddenly you think of your own scribbles, shopping lists, text messages, half-finished journals. Will anyone save those one day? Probably not. But the act of writing them, the reaching across time and space with ink or pixels, that's something humans have always done. It's not the medium, it's the message. And the message is, I was here. Timbuktu has said that in 10,000 different ways. Through gold leaf pages, whispered tales, bread ball cleaning rituals, and teenagers dyeing scraps while giggling in the dark. You wake early, or maybe you never fully slept. It's the kind of morning where even the sky seems reluctant to open its eyes. The light is blue and dim and soft, like it's filtered through layers of old cotton. Timbuktu is quieter now. No hustle, no footfalls, just the low rustle of the wind through alleyways and the occasional bray of a distant donkey. You're still in the old city, and today there's no rush. No scholar to meet, no manuscript to track down. Just one last slow stroll through the memories you've collected and a few more tucked along the way. Mainstream historical fact. Timbuktu's historic center is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, protected not just for its ancient buildings, but for the intangible heritage woven through its streets, oral poetry, storytelling traditions, and daily practices unchanged for centuries. You trace your fingers along the rough wall of a house, the plaster flaking like dry pastry. It smells of dust and life. You pass a small garden, a courtyard really, where a woman is grinding millet with practiced rhythm. She nods to you, not surprised by your wandering. You smile back. This is how Timbuktu lingers, not in grand monuments, but in these repeated motions, each one a thread in the larger cloth of the city's rhythm. Around the corner, someone has scribbled a proverb in charcoal on a wooden shutter. When the roots are deep, there is no reason to fear the wind. You think of all you've seen, the sandstorms, the sacks of manuscripts hidden under beds, the whispered arguments over ink, and you nod. Deep roots, indeed. You find yourself at a small tea stall. The fire beneath the brass kettle is already lit, and the air is rich with mint and sugar. You sit. No one asks you to order. They just pour. As you sip the warm, syrupy tea, your eyes drift to a mural on the adjacent wall. It's faded, half erased by time and weather, but the image is still clear enough. A man seated cross-legged, surrounded by scrolls, gesturing mid-story to an unseen crowd. His robes are blue, his face serene. He could be real or mythic, a teacher, a librarian, a griot, or maybe just someone who long ago decided that knowledge should never sleep. Quirky tidbit: the tea you're drinking, likely brewed from gunpowder green tea mixed with fresh mint, and a staggering amount of sugar, is often called desert whiskey for its invigorating properties. Some families serve it 3 times in a sitting, with each round sweeter than the last. The first is strong, like life, they say. The second sweet, like love. The third soft, like death. A man nearby starts humming low and off-key. A child joins in beating a plastic jug with a spoon. Somewhere down the street, a woman's voice floats through the air, reciting something in Songhai or Tamashek, perhaps a prayer or a memory. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu ever truly declined, or if the narrative of its fall is a Western lens trying to map its own ideas of progress. Some say the city faded with trade routes and colonization. Others say it simply shifted inward, choosing preservation over display. Either way, the city is still here, not frozen, not stuck, just enduring, evolving in quiet ways. You walk once more past the Jingwareber Mosque. The mud brick glows in the new light, golden and cracked, like it might crumble and resurrect in the same breath. Its tall wooden stakes, used both to support the structure and to climb it for annual replastering, cast long shadows that point east. You stop at a doorway. An old man sits there binding a small book. He looks up. "You've come far," he says in French-accented English. You nod. "You carry the dust on your shoes," he adds, and you glance down. It's true, you're wearing Timbuktu now, in the creases of your clothes, the cracks of your boots. Even your lungs feel fuller, like the air carries syllables that haven't been spoken in centuries. "Want to hear a poem?" he asks. You sit beside him, not even bothering to answer. He opens the little book, smooths the page, and reads in a whisper. Under sun, under moon, the written word does not wither. Though hands grow still, parchment remembers. He closes the book and hands it to you. "Keep it," he says, "but read it only on windy days." You smile, because that's the kind of logic that feels right here. Wisdom with a dust-covered spine. As you stand, the wind picks up slightly. It nudges your scarf, lifts the edges of your thoughts. You begin the walk back, but slowly, not ready to leave quite yet. And that's when you realize Timbuktu is not a place you simply visit. It's a story that adopts you, one you walk into and then carry with you like a line of poetry copied in the margin of a book. And now that story has one more chapter, yours. And now let it all soften. Let the ink blur. Let the dust settle. Let the ancient syllables echo faintly in your thoughts, like the distant toll of a bronze bell. The streets of Timbuktu fade behind you, not vanishing, but folding gently into the fabric of your memory. Like a well-worn page or a beloved bedtime story, it's still there, ready to be opened again when you need a whisper of wonder. Let your breath slow. Let your limbs grow heavy. You've wandered far tonight, not just across desert sands or manuscript halls, but across centuries of human thought, hope, and quiet persistence. And somehow it's all led back here to this soft moment of rest. There's nothing left to discover now, nothing to chase, no page unturned, only the warm hush of sleep rising like candle smoke through a still room. So close your eyes, traveler. You've read the footnotes of a civilization, listened to the lullabies of leather-bound wisdom, and sipped tea in the glow of a forgotten sun. And now you're home, not the kind with bricks or borders, but the kind made of stories, the kind that holds you. Sleep deep, dream wide, And remember, somewhere in the world, beneath a clay roof and a sky full of dust and stars, a page is turning, and it's waiting for you.